Hello, all you scaredy cats and kittens, and welcome to the Two Scaredy Cats podcast, where we talk about all things strange, unusual, and paranormal. We're your hostess with the mostest. I'm Stacy, and unfortunately, Kara's not with us this week. She is off on one of her many comic conventions that she has coming up in the next couple weeks. But she will be joining me here in a couple weeks for our next episode. Anyway, in the meantime, you just got me today. So, not much has been going on around here. We had a bunch of storms that happened about last week I guess it was. We had a tornado touchdown near us when we had to go down to the basement, and it was kind of crazy and scary, but luckily we came out of that okay. I know some people did not, and we send our love and prayers to those who lost their homes and stuff in the storms and that. And then just this past weekend, we had all this rain and we had a lot of flooding. In fact, there's still a lot of flooding going on near us. Well, finally the roads are mostly all opened up, but there's like a lot of damage down in downtown Cincinnati. We live about 20 miles outside of the city limits of Cincinnati, so we go downtown sometimes, but like right now it's kind of a mess down there as they're still cleaning up from all the flooding that we've had from the Ohio River flooding. But other than that, nothing much has been going on around here, or at least with me. Like I said, Kara is at a new anime convention, I believe in Youngstown, Ohio, but I'm not 1,000% sure, but I do know it's a new one. I think it's called SoccerCon or something like that. But anyway, that's where she is. So I guess it's just me today, and I guess I'll go ahead and get started with our story today. Today we will be talking about a haunted place in Alabama, which is kind of we haven't talked really a lot about haunted places in Alabama, so this is a new state we're covering today. And we're going to be talking about the Sloss Furnaces, which were used to help with power back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, to get power to the cities and to also make iron ore, which was used to make steel and stuff to be able to build buildings and help with the Gilded Age that was going on in the early 1900s, when, New York and all that was being built. We had the westward expansion going on. The railroads were bringing people out west. All that stuff was going on. So today, I'm going to be talking about the Sloss Furnaces and, in particular, a gentleman by the name of James Slag Wormwood. So the Sloss Furnaces were in Birmingham, Alabama, and it helped power the city for about a century before it was shut down in the early 1970s. But amid all the pride for this furnace, this was also one of the most haunted places in Alabama. First, I'm going to talk about a little bit of brief history on the Sloss Furnaces so we can find out a little bit about what they were used for and stuff. So in 1880, there was a gentleman by the name of Cornell James Sloss, and he was one of the founding fathers that actually founded Birmingham, Alabama. And he wanted to help Birmingham become a state that people wanted to come to, and so that they could have all these industries and just be this like shining jewel in the South. And so how he thought to do this was to build train tracks for people to take the trains so they could move further south from, New York and Philadelphia, and that where a lot of people were coming from Europe and that. So he decided he was going to build these furnaces. And he got the state of Alabama to give him some land in order to build the furnaces on. So he builds the furnaces. They started being built in like 1885. I think they were finished in like 1887, 88 maybe. And then they were continually used all the way up until 1970. So for over 100 years, they were used as a source of making like iron ore and other using coal and stuff to help power different parts of the city and stuff. So, like I said, for many years, that was the main source of them being able to make iron ore, which was used to make steel for buildings and stuff, and to also be used to make these train tracks in order to bring, people and to bring industrialism and stuff to the South, to Birmingham. So in the 1950s and the 1960s, people got big into the environment, and they were concerned. There was a lot of concerns about the stress that all these types of places were putting on the environment and all the pollutants that were going into the air. Also, public health had become very important at this time, and people were concerned about, people getting carbon monoxide poisoning from working in these furnace type places. Now, these furnaces caused a tremendous amounts of pollutants. People they weren't able to keep up with some of the newer types of fossil fuels and stuff that we were starting to use. So they decided to shut down the Sloss furnaces, and it was closed in 1971, and they were donated back to the state of Alabama. And at this time, the state decided that they were going to use them for industrial purposes, and to have as a museum for all the men that lost their lives when they were helping to bring these changes to the city of Birmingham back in those days. So working in these furnaces was like basically working in hell, especially during the summer, where the temperatures inside of these places could go as high as 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, they're working with melting like iron ore, so it becomes white hot, so they can form it into like steel plates and stuff and beams to be used to build buildings and bridges and all kinds of other things, so that it can start expanding to the west and doing industrialism, and start building factories and stuff. Visibility in these areas were very poor. Think about it. You have all these hot metals and stuff, so the air would get really thick with steam and stuff like that, and it would make it hard for workers to see what was going on, and that's how you had a lot of accidents. They were also, furnaces, I guess you could say, were made out of metal and stuff like that. So when they would have all this condensation and steam in these areas, it could get very slippery. And when you can't see very well, it's very easy to slip and fall into one of the pots that they had the hot iron ore in, or just or fall off from these platforms that they were built on. Not only were the workers had these very poor working conditions, but they were also working 12-hour days. So you had a lot of workers that were getting exhausted. And when you're exhausted, it's very hard for you to concentrate on what's going on. And that's when mistakes and accidents would happen, was when workers were not getting enough sleep. Things would go wrong, like they would be too close to like where they were melting hot liquid metal, and they would, either fall into a vat and get boiled to death, or they would have like the spray from whatever they were melting at the time get on them and they could go blind. Just all kinds of accidents were happening, or people were getting severely injured. And many of the men that worked there lost their eyesight from accidents and stuff that happened, or they were being killed slowly from the carbon monoxide that I talked about earlier. In the early 20th century, there was a gentleman that worked at the Sloss furnaces by the name of James Slag Wormwood. Now, he was a foreman, and he was very tough on his crew that he had working for him. And he was basically in charge of the skeleton crew, or the night crew. And he had extremely harsh work requirements of his men, and demanded that they would pump out power at a brutal pace, because he wanted to ensure that the city would remained powered through the nighttime. So he would make them, work these tough shifts and hard hours in order to make sure that the city remained had power for like the hospitals and stuff that were going on at the time. So during his time as a foreman, Wormwood had a lot of people that died on the job while he was the foreman. He had over 47 people that died on his watch as a foreman. But it wasn't long before Slag himself ended up dying early from an accident that happened to him. And now it's said that he haunts the place that claimed his life. So the story goes that in 1906, Wormwood was working the furnace at night with his crew when he accidentally fell into the site's largest furnace, which was known as Big Alice. In an instant, he basically melted to death from the hot molten ore that they had been melting that day. So considering his reputation while alive as being mean and cruel, people wondered if his death was maybe not an accident, or that maybe it happened on purpose just because of how mean he was. But regardless of that or not long after his death, workers at the Sloss Furnace began noticing that they felt a demonic presence among the furnace. It got so creepy that many workers refused to take shifts on the graveyard shift for fear that they would end up seeing whatever the spirit was that they believed was haunting the furnace. For many years after Wormwood's demise, workers claimed that his spirit would push them to work harder and faster. Some employees even asserted that the spirit would physically assault them, that they could actually feel like somebody was shoving them to work harder when they kind of slacked off a little bit. It sounded wild, but over the next couple of decades, there were over 100 reports filed of strange work happenings, and they attributed all of them to some kind of paranormal entity that they believe resided at the Sloss furnaces. People believed that it was the spirit of Wormwood. So there had been many creepy encounters over the years, with many people claiming that Wormwood's ghost still roams the furnace. At night, the words "go back to work" can be heard if you're ever there roaming around at night. The most creepy thing that happened in 1971, and it was the night before the closing of the furnace. The night shift chief at the time, a man by the name of Samuel Blumenthal, made one last sentimental round around the furnace when he came face to face with a monster. On his deathbed, he declared that this monster, which he said was like this half-human, half-demon creature that had red glowing eyes. And he said that the monster tried to push him into Big Alice's stairs. And he didn't like that, and he didn't want to be pushed. So he claimed he started fighting with this monster, and he was beating it with his bare fist. But when they found him later, he was covered in third-degree burns all over his whole body, even though the furnace had been turned off for over a week. He ended up dying a couple days after he had this encounter with the monster. Ghost enthusiasts and hunters still investigate this place today, and many have gotten smacked and touched by a presence there that people say that they have seen a ghost wearing blue overalls, which people say is the same overalls that were worn by the workers when they used to work at the furnace. And people just say that, strange things happen to them when they visit there. They've heard like people talking. They've been slapped or touched, especially in the tunnels. They have these tunnels where they would push the iron ore to be taking on train carts to different parts of the state or other parts of the United States. And when they were in these tunnels, the workers said that they felt like there was an evil entity down there with them. They felt like they were being hit in the back or shoved. So people have had a lot of encounters in that area and around and near the furnace. Would you dare to visit the Sloss Furnace, especially at nighttime? I don't know that I would want to go there. Kara and I have been to a very similar place to this called the Carey Furnace in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And just based off what I saw there, I can totally understand if you're very tired and working 12-hour days, how you might end up getting hurt or killed, just because of these furnaces are very, they're built on these platforms, very high up, so that when they have to make these big, huge, kind of like cauldrons that they heat up all this metal and stuff in to help get it hot and liquid so that they can then form them to make these steel pillars and stuff that they use for constructions of anywhere from, hotels and stuff like that to bridges and the beams for bridges and stuff. And I can just tell you from our experience of being on there, it's very, some of your stairs are very narrow. And this is during the daylight, and it wasn't 1,000 degrees when we were there. It was still kind of, it was during the fall, so it was kind of cool. So it wasn't like super hot. And I can tell you, walking around there, it was a little dizzying and stuff. And being high up like that, I can definitely see why you could get confused, or maybe, like how accidents could definitely happen, especially if it was raining or if there was a lot of moisture or steam in the air. It would make the steps and stuff that you use to get around, and there's like very narrow walkways and stuff. Sometimes there's no railings. I could see how you might slip and fall to your death or get injured really badly. I totally get it. And I can see why they had so many people get injured and hurt working at these types of places. Definitely the one when we visited Carey Furnace, which I said is in Pittsburgh, you could tell there was a lot of energy still there from workers that had worked there and died in that. It was also near the Civil War, so there was a lot of soldiers that crossed through that area. And when we were there, there was they said that there was a ghost on the property there, that they had these not tunnels, but these little caves on the property where they stored some of the metal before they melted it. And sometimes they said you could see these Civil War soldiers in full gear and stuff just walking around there, because that's where they hung out, and they would hide there during the day. So, they wouldn't be found by the other side when they were busy fighting and stuff like that. But anyway, that's all I have today about the Sloss Furnace in Birmingham, Alabama, and its contributions to making America great at the time. And without those types of places, we wouldn't have the infrastructure and the buildings and a lot of bridges and stuff that we have today. The Empire State Building probably wouldn't be here today without the steel and stuff that they melted and made into the beams to help construct that. And a lot of the buildings that you see in New York and some of our other major cities were all constructed with the iron ore that was there, and the railroads. I mean, westward the westward expansion, when, we decided we were going to go out west and start developing further, towards California and that from the East Coast. So anyway, that's my little history lesson / haunted history of the Sloss Furnaces in Alabama. I hope you enjoyed. Stay safe out there. Hopefully the storms will kind of calm down a little bit and we can get into some nicer weather. Hopefully warmer weather would be nice. I got a lot of plants I got to plant and gardening to get to. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed our episode today. Like I said, Carol will be back with me in 2 weeks. Don't forget to like and follow us. You can find us on YouTube. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts. Make sure you like us and follow us on Instagram. And all our scaredy cats and kittens out there, remember, curiosity didn't kill these two scaredy cats.